August 4th, 2010. On this day, I found myself homeless on a bench outside of City Hall in Center City, Philadelphia, having just been released from Delaware County Prison for yet another DUI, another possession charge. And that's what my life had become, a series of working extremely hard to get things in my life, only to lose them all as a result of my addiction. Working extremely hard to get the same exact things back that I had lost, again, only to lose them all as a result of my addiction. And I'll never forget this day. It's August 4th, 2010. I'm laying on this bench. It's a hard plank, dark green bench with concrete sides. And I'm laying there and I'm looking up, and on top of City Hall, there's a statue of William Penn. And I'm looking up at this statue of William Penn, just thinking, what have I done to my life? And the feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, I could still tap into those today when I think about this sometimes. The best way that I describe what happened next is when your internal psyche can't take any more of the narrative that, Eric, you're a loser, what's wrong with you? Just replaying over and over again for a decade. It just couldn't take anymore. And I like the word surrendered. So my psyche just surrendered. And at the same time, my physical body couldn't take any more of the drinking, the drugs, the not sleeping, the poor nutrition, everything that comes with that, quote, addict lifestyle. And my physical body surrendered. And at the intersection of my psyche surrendering and my physical body surrendering, it allowed what I consider to be a higher consciousness to step in. And ever since that moment, I've just been obsessed with finding ways, means, strategies, methods, whatever I could find, not only to help myself, but to help anybody else who I possibly could. That journey's taken me through 12-step programs. I've been through the 12-step several times, sponsored people with many years. Now, I also became a certified personal trainer so I could understand the symbiotic relationship between the mind and the body and how they work together. Went to Drexel University to study psychology so I could understand diagnostic criteria and let people know that your diagnosis does not have to determine your destiny. And I also went on to publish a book called Reclaiming the Brain, which a lot of this presentation comes from, but it took me 4 years to research for that book. And one thing that I learned for sure is comorbidities between gambling disorder, other disorders, addiction disorders, all have the same neurobiological underpinning. So we're going to be talking a lot about those similarities today, but anytime that you embark on a research journey of any kind, you have to have an agreed upon working definition. So I like this definition of addiction. It comes from NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. But if you look at it, it kind of points to maybe some gaps in the way that we define addiction and the way that we're treating all types of addiction. So in this case, addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing brain disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and continued use despite harmful consequences. So if we hold this definition up against how we're treating it, chronic, number one, chronicity implies management. You can't treat a chronic disease acutely, but a lot of times we're going away for 28 days. We're going away for short bursts and thinking that's going to solve the issue. We've learned over the years that that's not the best approach to take. But that's still somewhat common practice. So we'll take a look at that. Also, brain disorder. So we understand and define addiction as a brain disorder, but we don't often teach about what exactly is going on in the brain, and are there any things we could do to mitigate some of the issues going on? And in fact, there are, and we'll be talking about that today. And then finally, characterized by compulsive drug seeking and continued use despite harmful consequences. So despite all the negative repercussions, there's still going to be addiction. So we can't penalize ourselves out of this problem. But while researching for this webinar, I found it interesting to take a look at this definition from NIDA and hold it up against how gambling addiction is also being defined as an impulse control disorder in which sufferers cannot control the impulse to gamble. Here's this word again, despite the fact that it's causing problems in their lives and the lives of their loved ones. So again, very important distinctions to be made against how we define something versus how we're actually choosing interventions for that same issue. But it all comes down to, at the end of the day, what's happening in the brain, what's going on underneath the hood. And we're going to talk about that today. And this is what I really like to explain and like to discuss in detail, because ultimately there are things that we can do. But the first thing is to understand what are the key structures and functions as it relates to addiction. And I had a mentor of mine one time tell me, if you can't explain something to a 5-year-old, then you don't know it well enough. So I thought, how am I going to explain neuroscience to a 5-year-old? And then it came to me, emojis. So I'm going to be teaching today's lesson using emojis. And the first character we're going to introduce is dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter located and produced in the ventral tegmental area. So you could think of this as a hip nightclub. Think of it as Club VTA. Dopamine loves to have a good time. It's about reward. It's about motivation, desire, right? So think of Club VTA, dopamine. So a hip nightclub VTA, this is where the dopamine is produced. Next character we're going to introduce is the orbital frontal cortex. So heart eye emoji, reward, I love. Orbital frontal cortex is the hug emoji, okay? This is the part of brain, it's right behind your eye if you go straight back, and it's known for valuation. So when you value something, put a lot of value, think you want to give it a hug. So this is the hug emoji, orbital frontal cortex. Next up, we have the amygdala. So this is a part of the brain typically talked about in terms of fear, but it's actually the whole gamut of emotions. And because of this range of emotions, the zany face emoji, I think, is perfect for this. So think zany face emoji when we're talking about the amygdala, important factor. And then the nucleus accumbens. So this is an area, if you look into any addiction literature, you're going to hear this term. Anytime, if we were at a live seminar right now, I would be giving people high fives. Anytime you have an impulse to do something, let's do it, high five, let's do it. This impulse, this is the part of the brain where you're feeling that impulse. Dopamine's filling up the nucleus accumbens. Next up, we have dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. We could just think prefrontal cortex. This is the nerd emoji. So this is the part of the brain, very important. When you have a high five and impulse to do something, it'll say, wait, let's think about this. Is this a good idea? So if you're taking notes, the acronym WAIT, W-A-I-T, for this part of the brain stands for working memory, attention, inhibitory control, and task switching, the ability to switch back and forth. So very important part of the brain for adaptive behaviors in human being. And then the last structure I will introduce is the motor cortex. So this is the part of the brain that gets your body moving. Let's go do something. All right. Now, as I talked about in the beginning, August 4th, 2010 hit a bottom in my life. That was the last time that I used any mood or mind altering substance. So I'm coming up on 12 years in recovery, and extremely grateful for a lot of people for that happening. But over the years, other things have come up. And for a while, I was really into chocolate chip cookies. So I'm going to explain how these brain structures work when it comes to chocolate chip cookies. So I'll give you a common scenario. A few years ago, I would be on a Sunday, let's say, sitting with my wife watching the Philadelphia Eagles play, and during a commercial break, the the Keebler cookie commercial would come on, right? I would see that cookie, and just so you know, these aren't just any cookie. These are the fresh out of the oven that when you break them in the middle, you pull them apart, the chocolate still. So these are really good cookies. Okay. So I would see that commercial and my brain would go into action. So the first thing is I would have the dopamine kicking off. So you could think having a really good time, dopamine sees the commercial. I want that. That will be rewarding for me. So dopamine, then I come down, amygdala, did I have a good time last time I had cookies? Yeah, you had a great time. Good emotions are associated with cookies. Orbital frontal cortex, hug emoji, I value cookies. Cookies are of high value to me. and then I have an impulse to go get these cookies. I check in with the nerd emoji. Prefrontal cortex, is this a good idea? Yeah, cookies are really good. What do I have to do to get them? Local grocery store, aisle 12, halfway down on the left. And then we go to the motor cortex, and I get moving to go get that cookie. That is an adaptive way to get a chocolate chip cookie. Now, a few years have gone by. Cookies are starting to become a problem for me. I'm lying about my cookie use. My wife asked me how many I had. I said 5. It's really closer to 10. I'm hiding cookies, but not quite hiding them. You know, when you strategically place things in the pantry behind other things. So anyway, long story short, cookies are starting to become a bit of a problem for me. So now let's look at maladaptive cookie eating behavior. Same impulse. I'm watching the football game. A commercial comes on. Dopamine floods my system. Now, instead of the enjoyable emotion associated with the amygdala, now it's fear of what will happen if I don't get my cookie. So it's becoming dependence, if you could think along those lines. Orbital frontal cortex, over time, through maladaptive behaviors and repeated exposures to cookie use or any addiction, this part of the brain, this is an important part, starts to adapt in negative ways and put valuation on things that are actually having destructive impact on our lives. And then the nucleus accumbens is having a strong impulse. Now, this is important to remember. Dopamine flooding the nucleus accumbens, you're having a very strong impulse, or we could even call it a craving. So you're having a craving to do that behavior that you know is bad for you. But the most important thing that I want you to remember about this slide is when you have that impulse, instead of being able to check with the nerd emoji, when you're in the presence of cues or triggers, whether that be a slot machine, whether that be you know, a drug-related thing, whatever it might be, when in the presence of these triggers, this part of the brain goes offline. So you have an impulse and you go straight into action. So it goes up to this part of the brain, the dorsal striatum. And when you go from impulse to action without checking in and having the ability to put that buffer between stimulus and response, that's what we call a compulsion. So as I've just illustrated, things can become a problem when these areas are not working in a functional way. And we're going to look at that just one more way when it comes to craving and as it relates to survival. So if we really take a look back and try to understand why, from an evolutionary standpoint, why does dopamine exist? Well, dopamine, from what most experts agree, we evolved with dopamine to reward us when we do things to perpetuate the species. Things to do like eat food, drink water, sex, right? Perpetuate the species. You get rewarded for that. So you will continue to pursue it and do more of it. There's also a very important neurotransmitter when it comes to addiction called glutamate. It's related to memory. Don't worry, none of this will be on the test, but it is important to remember, because when these areas are being tapped into on a regular basis, this is what makes that hijacked brain you hear a lot about. It starts to make associations with the addictive behavior, whatever that might be, with as much importance as food, water, the basic necessities. So what we're looking at here on the other side of the screen is, if you've ever seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've taken a psychology course, you've probably bumped across this, I've come across this, but I'll just quickly explain it. Essentially what Maslow said is, until your physiological needs, your most basic needs are met, you can't worry about safety, you can't worry about love and belonging, and up the pyramid we go. So as I mentioned, over time with addictive behaviors, because of this increase in dopamine, you are putting as much emphasis on the addictive behaviors as basic needs. So in my experience with drug addiction, what would happen is people would say to me, Eric, you spent all of your money, all of your rent money on drugs and alcohol? What are you, an idiot? So you could see the similarities as it would relate to gambling as well. So Eric, you spent, or you took money from your mom, you borrowed money from your mom to do this? What kind of son are you? So love and belonging, it seems like I'm neglecting it, but in actuality, I didn't understand this at this time. So what was happening as it relates to me, and this is very common with people struggling with addictions, is if you don't understand this well enough, you're starting to tell yourself a story of, I'm not a good son. I must be an idiot. I don't have any esteem. I'm a loser. And what happens is that creates a negative feedback loop, because that line of thinking makes you feel more stressed, less self-worth. Why not just participate in that negative behavior? And now we have a negative feedback loop. So we have to figure out a way to reverse it. And then just real quick slide, because I think this is very important as practitioners to understand, but it's also important for individuals to understand. When participating in addictive behaviors, this excess dopamine. So I'm going to show in the case of drugs and alcohol, amphetamine, for instance. So we could see 1,000% dopamine with amphetamines. Basic stuff like food, like sex, which most of us would agree is a pretty good time, is about 200. So we're seeing 5 times more with amphetamine. This is the example of you're partying with Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones here on this side, and then when you're getting in early recovery, you're hanging out with the Jonas Brothers. So you're trying to get as much pleasure from normal activities, and that's really just not possible based on how the dopamine system is set up. And oftentimes what will happen is this process of sadness, of almost depression, where it's called ANHEDONIA. So when you're overcoming an addiction in those early stages of recovery, I try to coach people to say, oftentimes you're not going to experience a whole lot of joy from a great meal like some people will, but eventually, because the brain is so malleable and so adaptive, that will repair itself with time. And that's really where my interest comes into. So it's one thing to identify what makes up the hijacked brain, but the next thing is, how do we reclaim it? How do we reclaim the brain? What sort of behaviors can we do right now, starting right now, to start to cultivate a healthy, adaptive brain and repair some of that damage? And this is a model that I've come up with. I've had the privilege to teach it all around the country at this point. This works well with any intervention that's being offered. It's just a nice, positive, proactive approach towards, again, reclaiming the brain. So I'll quickly explain this model. I call it the 4C model. But first, down here, consistency. So I will often have people come to me and they're like, Eric, I'm just stuck, man. I just feel stuck. And I have to remind them, no, you're not stuck, because time is moving forward no matter what. So you're either moving with it or you're falling behind. So it's important to make sure that we're taking the steps daily to consistently grow in our lives and live incredible lives. So in order to do that, I believe this 4C system works really well. The first C is clarity. So having clear goals. We'll break each of these down too. And then having cognition, thought processes that could support these goals. And then having chemistry. In this case, we're talking about biochemistry, brain chemistry. And then finally, connection, having the right people and resources in your life. Starting with clarity and starting with a definition of recovery that I absolutely love. And I think this is applicable across the board, but this is how SAMHSA defines recovery: a process of change through which a person improves their health and wellness, lives a self-directed life, and strives to reach their fullest potential. I love this definition. I think it's very empowering, and it points out that, in fact, this is a process, and oftentimes it's a process of setting goals and growing. So I'm very passionate when it comes to this topic, and it's important to understand that in order to reach your goals, you need to act. So think of this acronym, if you're taking notes: act on your goals. Act on your goals. The A is assess. So the first thing that I want you to do is give yourself a score on a scale of 1 to 10 in each major area of your life that's important to you. So that could be your family, your friends, your health, whatever it is you're pursuing. Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Can't get to point B unless you know where point A is first. So the A is assess. The next one is clarity. We have to get clear on our goals. What exactly are we aiming for? Now, oftentimes, if we were in a room right now, we have, 100 people in a room, there's going to be 100 different personal goals. And there's a strategy to, of course, achieve those goals. What I like to talk about, because it relates to everybody, is clarity around how you structure your day. So there's a system that I use and that I created and talk about a lot called the bookend system. So I really want you to remember this. This is going to be your takeaway exercise. Bookend system. What that means is, how do you bookend your day? So first bookend, first thing in the morning, what I want you to start doing is start your day with something inspirational, motivational, or educational. You could read, watch a video, whatever it might be. But please, whatever you do, do not put the news on first thing in the morning. The job of the news is to sensationalize the worst things that have happened in the entire day the night before and feed it to you for breakfast. Please do not accept that breakfast. It's important. Start your day inspirational, motivational, educational, priming your mind for success. One thing that I do is I like YouTube videos, and I've done this long enough now where the algorithm will suggest certain things that are motivational. But if I have any coffee drinkers out there, there's this beautiful moment where I'm having my coffee and the caffeine kicks in right as the positive message is kicking in, and it just propels me towards a really productive, positive day. So that's the first bookend. The last bookend, the second bookend, at the very end of your day, either write down or say out loud 3 things that you're grateful for. I do this with my wife each night. Very powerful exercise. Don't just think it, bring a motor activity into it, but starting your day with inspiration, motivation, education, ending it, marinating in gratitude. If you repeat that right there for 30 days, and please take this on as an activity, repeat it for 30 days, you will notice a significant, very good positive effect on your life. And then the T in ACT is teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. We need a team of people around us who can help us to achieve our goals, to support us as we pursue our goals. So this is a very important piece of it, teamwork. But again, assess, clarity, teamwork, act on your goals. There's another thing to consider when you're setting goals and reclaiming your brain. Not everybody's going to support your goals. Now, this is an example. So I travel a lot, and I love to hike. So anytime that I travel, I'll often Google hikes near me. And I was in Portland, Oregon recently, and I Googled hike near me, and Mount Hood came up. And you can actually see it from Portland. It's this beautiful snow-capped mountain. And I thought what was very interesting is 4.7. So what this is saying is somebody gave the mountain a bad review. And this is just the type of world we live in these days. So you don't have to share your goals with everybody. Not everybody's going to support it. Just have goals you're working towards, a small power circle to support you. But just keep in mind, not everybody's going to support your goals, and that's okay. They're your goals. This is your life. We get one shot at it. Live it fully. All right. So now we're moving along to cognition. We have great goals. Now it's about our thought process, and that all comes down to what are we focusing on? So when we focus on things that we could influence, our health, our family life, these things, our influence grows. When we focus on things that we're concerned about, that we're worried about, but in fact, we don't have any agency, we don't have the ability to control any of these things, it's a very dangerous place to be, and it leads to a process called learned helplessness. Now, in order, to really understand the impact that this could have, and anybody who studies psychology probably has heard this term, when we focus the lion's share of our attention on these areas that we are concerned about, that we're worried about, but we actually can't do anything to control, it creates, it's a precursor to depression. It's a precursor to anxiety. So we want to be very mindful and strategic about focusing on things that we can control, because there's, it's well known that over time, if we're constantly replaying self-pity thoughts, fear thoughts, worry, anger, resentment thoughts, that it has an impact on our physical body. So now we know that the head and the body are in fact connected. We need to take a more holistic view when it comes to either working with individuals, and even just self-care, because psychosomatic symptoms are a very real thing, right? We understand that. So, but the question we want to ask ourselves, well, if in fact our thoughts can make us sick, can our thoughts make us well? And the research is absolutely, there's consensus, our thoughts can have the reverse effect. It can empower us. What you need to understand, though, is we can't erase a thought. We can't don't think these negative thoughts, but we can replace a thought. So having a ready-made affirmation available, so when you notice a negative thought pattern kicking in and your shoulders are drooping, you're starting to feel bad about yourself, having this ready-made affirmation to kick in and to knock that negative one off track is a very practical way, powerful way to increase your sense of well-being and have a whole host of positive effects on your physiology, which I could do a whole separate webinar on that. But the important key takeaway is establish this ready-made affirmation now. Have it ready. I've done this for 6 years. I was just talking about this recently with somebody. When I wake up in the morning, oftentimes my brain will just start this affirmation. The power of repetition, is very impactful when it comes to behavior change, but also, just living, positive, healthy, productive life, and fending off some of these learned helplessness and psychosomatic negative symptoms. All right. Just one more time, you can't erase a thought, but you can replace a thought. Now we're going to talk about chemistry. So what we're talking about here again is can in fact we move our body a certain way and influence our brain chemistry? And yes, science is very clear. Our physiology has a direct impact on our psychology. So a quick hack when you may be noticing yourself not feeling your best. Again, your body tells the story, hunched over. I use this as a tell. If you're heading into work, or you're engaging with family, and somebody says, how's it going? And your response is, it's going. Now it's time to shift your physiology and get into a better state. So these are little tells, at least for me, and there's an easy way to do this. So what I recommend is if you're not in the best state, and you want to kind of get into a different state, a more energetic state, go to the bathroom, excuse yourself from something big. If we were live right now, and have everybody do this big arms up, victory pose, arms to the sky, big smile on your face. And the incredible thing about the brain is that when you do this activity, this physiological activity, it sets off a cascade of positive neurochemicals in your brain, and you start to feel victorious. You start to feel the way that you're posing. And just so you know that I'm not making this up, this is research coming out of Harvard University, so pretty well-known institution. And there's an amazing TED Talk on this that I would highly recommend. Amy Cuddy, Power Poses. If you haven't seen it, it's incredible what is within our locus of control, what we can do on any given day to just have a positive impact on our brains and on our reality. And when you're trying to navigate and overcome negative behaviors, this is the approach that we want to take. We want to be proactive. It's not what we're not doing, it's what are we doing, and what are we doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to continue to root down these behaviors and just make it part of who we are. So this is a very important thing. Exercise as well. I mean, the scientific literature, the randomized control trials coming out, finding that in fact exercise outperforms or does as well as a lot of pharmacological solutions, which is just really, it's interesting to know. It's good to know that we're studying these things, not saying one is better than the other, or implying that, but just the fact that the research is being done to show that regular exercise isn't just good for your body, isn't just good for losing weight and building muscle. It has an impact on everything in your life. So something that I always recommend and that I believe in and subscribe to. Also, breath work. So stress plays a major role in exacerbating mental health conditions, exacerbating comorbid conditions that are oftentimes related to addiction, whether that be gambling addiction, gambling disorders, whether that be drug and alcohol, whatever of those. We know that stress plays a key role. Breath work has been proven to reduce cortisol levels, to reduce stress. And one thing that I try to do, and there's a lot of different ways, to do breathing. There's a lot of great information out there that we could all review. But a tell for me is that when I could do deep diaphragmatic breathing, so pushing my stomach out, big deep breaths, belly breathing, that helps to calm me down. But it also communicates to my brain that I am in fact not under the duress that my mind is telling me that I'm under, right? Because oftentimes these spikes in cortisol, it's been compared to as if you're being chased by a lion. When you slow down your breathing, there's a communication between your respiratory system and a group of nerves. I don't want to get too technical, but the nerves communicate with the brain and say, I am safe. I wouldn't be able to breathe this deeply if I were being chased by a lion, or if whatever my mind is telling me were in fact true. So that's a really important finding for reducing stress. Big, deep breaths communicates to the brain, I am safe, slows the heart rate down, gets you to a more present place, gets that prefrontal cortex back online. So you have self-regulation skills available, or tools available to implement when in the presence of certain triggers that may lead to negative consequences. And then the final C of the 4C method is connection. And when we talk about connection, the most important person in the world that we need to connect with is ourselves. So it's important as practitioners, as parents, as just members of society, that we need to take care of ourselves if we're going to help other people. You can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care is not selfish. And anytime you've been on a flight, the flight attendant actually puts on a master class in personal development. People may not even realize it when they come down and they say, in case of an emergency, put on your oxygen mask first. Because if you're not breathing, if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't expect to take care of anybody else. Another exercise, write this down or put this into practice. Do it today. Make a quick list. Who are the most important people in your life? Jot down 3 to 5. How do they add value to your life? Write down some things you appreciate about them. If you want to take it a step further and earn extra credit and give somebody a really great Friday, when you've identified those things that you appreciate about them that add value to your life, shoot them a text message, shoot them an email. Hey, I just thought about this. I did this webinar today. I remembered something about you that I think is really great. I wanted you to know it. Man, that could make somebody's day. What a great message to get on a Friday. And then ultimately, what can we do to bring more to the relationship jot it down, and then put it into practice. And then finally, when it comes to addiction, the opposite of addiction is connection. I love that line. I love that term because it's so important that we're connecting with others. We're able to be vulnerable. We're able to share what's going on with us. We're able to uplift others as well as be uplifted. So this is the 4C method. I believe very much in this. I put this into practice in my own life. And just to finish with this story. So in the beginning, I mentioned August 4th, 2010, laying on that bench, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless at a personal bottom in my life. I've been putting these tools into practice almost 6 years from that day, August 4th, 2010, November 4th, 2016. I signed a contract with a law firm on the 34th floor of the 1500 Market Building. Now, this is the building directly next door to City Hall. And I was sitting in a boardroom signing the contract to teach health and wellness to lawyers. And the whole time in that boardroom, I'm looking out the window directly into the eye of that same statue. And I believe with every fiber of my being that from that bench to that boardroom is possible for anybody. So again, grateful for the opportunity to speak today, and we have time for Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're interested in learning a more in-depth version of what we went over today, I do in fact have a book out that goes into a lot more detail about some of the neurological underpinnings and some of the behaviors that could be taken and the science backing up the behaviors related to these brain areas.
Eric, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I think we already do have some questions, and some people are rolling in with comments. So I am going to open it up for any comments and questions that anyone may have. You can either put it in the QA, or you can put it in the regular chat box. So let me see. Right now I'm getting a lot of informative comments. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Excellent training. Thank you. I think everybody's just appreciative of you right now, Eric. So
I'm appreciative of the opportunity, and oh, here we go.
Yeah, so one question, could you speak a little bit more about the role of the amygdala? I was a little unsure about the zany emoji.
Yeah, so well, the amygdala oftentimes, you'll hear about it as it relates to fear. So anytime that you're scared, this is the part of the brain associated with that. But in fact, it's the whole range of emotions when it comes to amygdala. So if you're having a positive and negative emotion and you were in a brain scan, this part of the brain would light up. Now, what I was getting to as it relates to addiction specifically, so the role of amygdala when it comes to later stage addiction, when it comes to dependency, is you feel a sense of fear that if you don't participate in the behavior, there will be negative consequences. In the case of addiction, it might be withdrawal. In the case of other disorders, behavioral disorders, it might be, you won't get that same sense of satisfaction out of life that you once had, whatever it might be. But it shifts from a positive emotion where this is great, I'm loving what's going on, maybe when you first started gambling or when you first started the behavior that you're now addicted to. But then it turns to what happens if I don't get it. And this fear center is a very key driver to behavior, to continuously doing a behavior, right? Because that's why we have these systems, is to stay away from things that might kill us, stay away from things that might hurt us. But again, in this scenario, it's a hijacked system functioning. Does that make sense? So the system is not working in a way that's adaptive. So it's actually working. And I can't see if the chat to know if I answered that question or I could.
I believe that person wrote back and said that they got a good answer. We have a couple more questions coming in. So one question, and this is in regards to the pretest, but they wanted to see if you could explain or give an example about the replacing or redirecting a thought.
Yeah, I mean, so what you may have heard, so I don't know, I make assumptions you may have heard, but oftentimes there'll be an example of if you have, a persistent thought and you say, don't think about this thought. So you're trying to control the mind with the mind, and it'll be, don't think about a blue elephant. Don't think about a blue elephant. Whatever you do, don't think about a blue elephant. So I could remember being taught that in my early days of training. And they're like, if you tell yourself not to think about a blue elephant, it is just a matter of time before you start thinking about a blue elephant. Now, recently what's come out is, okay, well, you can't think two thoughts simultaneously. So instead of telling yourself what not to think, what do you want yourself to think? Lean into that more. In my case, and this is just practical use case, this is what I believe in. It's like, if I can't use this in my own life successfully in a practical way, like I'm not even at this stage in my life, quite frankly, interested in learning about it, because I'm not doing any more studies or anything like that. Like, can I use it? Can I teach it to other people quickly? And can they use it? So I have 2 affirmations. No offense, but I don't share these affirmations because what I've learned is even if somebody inadvertently is like, I'm like, I don't like my affirmation anymore. So I don't share it, but I have 2. And I've used these affirmations consistently for 6 years. Oftentimes, if I'm going for a walk, I'll just think these affirmations because they make me feel real good. I put an association towards them. But in my own life, even as a person who's in long-term recovery, I feel that it's very important not to let my mind just wander too much, unless it's in a structured meditative way, which I have time carved out for that. But an idle mind is the devil's playground. I've heard that saying before. So I try to just be very strategic about thinking these affirmations and not letting my mind go towards negativity, which oftentimes it can do that. So I just think I view it as a very proactive approach towards having a healthy mindset. And again, it's within my control. Because I could remember, and I've worked with countless people where it's like, well, this persistent negative thought keeps coming up. Like, all right, we could work with that maybe, and get to the root of it. There's a time and place for that. But if you're at work or if you're doing something where you need to be focused and present, you need a quick way to kind of get back on track. And this is just a quick way to do that.
Thank you. And another quick question, what's the name of the Power Pose TED Talk that you referenced?
I believe it's Power Poses, but it's Amy Cuddy, where you'll find it, AMYCUDDY, I believe. And I think it's Power. If you just put in Power Poses, it's bound to come up. It was a very popular TED Talk, but if you're like me and you like to understand the science behind it, read some of the literature she has out there, because that's what's really incredible. I mean, the impact that it had on cortisol level, the impact that it had on the other, I think it was endorphins. It's powerful. And again, it takes 2 to 3 minutes. Like, these are practical tools we could put right into practice to shift our state in a favorable way.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that one out after this webinar. So, and then a few more questions. So, can you speak about people who have been severely traumatized in childhood, and the brain, if it's affected by that as well?
You went out a little bit there. What was that?
The question came in, can you speak about people who have been severely traumatized in childhood? And if the brain is affected and how the brain is affected by that as well.
Yeah, so very interested in this topic, especially when it comes to adverse childhood experiences. So studying these ACEs and how it relates to prefrontal cortex development specifically. So we talked about that nerd emoji and how important it is for self-regulation. So understanding self-regulation as I have an impulse to scream at somebody, but I've developed this brain region, prefrontal cortex, enough, or it's developed in a healthy adaptive way to where I could say, let me think this through. No, don't say this now. So I could tamp down that impulse because I have a healthy, strongly developed prefrontal cortex. Well, what the research has found when it comes to adverse childhood experiences or trauma, childhood trauma, is that this area doesn't adapt in a healthy way, and it can have long-term negative consequences. And what we see this a lot in different communities, specific communities where maybe in fact there are 3 or more ACEs that a child is experiencing, and you could look at later stage consequences, whether that comes to the penal system, whether that comes to, and they're starting to draw these correlations and say, wow, we need to study social determinants of health way more than we are. We need to give these children in certain communities, underserved communities specifically, a lot more resources, or the brain's not going to develop in a healthy way, and there's going to be impulsive decisions that are going to have negative consequences, not just on the individual, on our society. This impacts our entire world. So I think it's very important, but that's just one area specifically where trauma leads to maladaptive changes in the brain, and it impacts our whole world, quite frankly.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to see if you can answer this live. This is the question that came in. Is the amygdala part of memory? I've heard that the amygdala was what you experienced your first, is what's triggered when you experience your first high. Does, for example, trying heroin for the first time, does that mean that the amygdala will always remember your first high? If wrong, then what part of the brain is responsible for memory?
Hippocampus. So there's, again, what I like to teach, and teaching it with emojis, is I'm giving you the high level right now. Like I'm giving, it's very global. Everything that we do impacts most areas of the brain. What I went over today were the key structures and functions that you'll see at the top of the list when it comes to addiction. You know, depending on how deep you want to go, you can reach out to me after. I'll share some peer-reviewed articles that could really kind of give you a strong understanding. If I had more space and more time, I would definitely include the hippocampus. Hippocampus is the area associated with memory. The amygdala and the hippocampus work very closely as a 1-2 punch. So you'll notice if emotion is related to rooting down memory. The classic example is 9/11. Where were you on 9/11? Most people, depending on your age, will tell you exactly where they were, because it was such an impactful emotional state. But if I said, where were you on 9/9/2001? Most people don't know. Why? Because emotion, amygdala, and memory are very closely related. So in the example of heroin, perhaps where it was such a euphoric experience that you'll never forget when that happened. It's not the case with me, quite frankly, because mine was, I gradually got to the point where I was hit that bottom that I described in the beginning. But it's perfectly reasonable to think if somebody had such a euphoric experience, that would root it down in their memory, and they would always remember their first.
So thank you. And I heard that my audio might be a little bit rough, so I apologize if it's coming off. It's not being clear. Any, I want to open up just any last minute comments. I'll let Eric get out of here. Good, Eric. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry, we have one more question. Can you speak about brain elasticity?
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting, I'd say, finding over the past 10 to 15 years in neuroscience, right? For a long time, it was like, well, after the age of 35, the brain you got is the brain you got. And in fact, absolutely, it is not neuroplasticity. It's well understood that the brain, can continue to be adapted in positive ways, and there's plasticity throughout your entire lifespan. So putting into practice, hopefully you learned some things today where you're like, I want to put it into practice, learn new things at an older age. There are, of course, critical periods when you're younger. Would it have been easier if my mom had me learn Spanish at the age of 11? Do I wish she did? Yes. But that doesn't mean you can't do it now. Playing instruments at certain times throughout childhood. Again, if you want to learn more about this, just look critical periods, childhood development. But the important takeaway is, as adults, there's still plasticity. There's still room to grow. There's still an opportunity to change your behaviors, to live an amazing life. And hopefully I shared some things today that'll help to do that.
Thank you, Eric, for speaking with us today. Thank you for joining us in PM and for another great webinar that was able to be put on for council. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.